Alright, an elevator that weighs 3.0 times 10 to the third newtons is accelerated upward at 1.0 meters per second squared. What force in tension does the cable exert to give it this acceleration? Well, since it's accelerated, we know from Newton's second law that F net does not equal 0 because it is being accelerated. So let's look at a free body diagram of it. I have 3.0 times 10 to the third newtons, which is the force of gravity, the weight of the object down, and it's being accelerated upwards, so that means there is a force going up, and that is that tension force. Alright? Now that tension force must be greater than the force of gravity, otherwise it wouldn't be accelerated. We know that they have to cancel out some because they're in opposite directions, but this one has to be larger because the net force is not 0. So let's find what the net force is. F net equals mass times acceleration. Well, I know that my acceleration is 1.0 meters per second squared, but I don't know my mass. But I do know my weight. My weight is 3.0 times 10 to the third newtons. And as we've said before on a previous example, your weight is your mass times the acceleration due to gravity. So that means my weight, 3.0 times 10 to the third newtons, is equal to my mass times a negative 9.8 meters per second squared. So I simply divide those. Negative 9.8 meters per second squared. And that is a negative because your weight is always down. So my mass is a 3.0 times 10, oops, you gotta make it negative, 3.0 negative times 10 to the third divided by 9.8 negative equals, mass is 306. Now I have two sig figs, and so I'm going to have 3.1 times 10 to the 2 kilograms. So that's my mass. So now you know my mass, so I can find my acceleration using this equation. Or sorry, I know my acceleration and my mass, so I can find my net force. So F net equals my mass, 3.1 times 10 to the 2 kilograms, times my acceleration, 1.0 meter per second squared, means my net force is 3.1 times 10 to the 2 newtons. Okay? Now the question asks for what is the force of tension. Well, I know that tension is larger than the force of gravity. So my force of tension, I'm going to redraw my free body diagram here. My force of gravity is down, my force of tension is up, and my net force is the sum of those. That means F net is going to equal the force of tension minus the force of gravity. I know that it's minus here because this one has to be larger because it's being accelerated upward. Okay, so I'm going to add Fg to both sides. So that means my force of tension is my net force plus the force of gravity. Well, my net force, as we found just a second ago, is 3.1 times 10 to the 2. So 3.1 times 10 to the 2 newtons plus my force of gravity, which is 3.0 times 10 to the third, 3.0 times 10 to the third newtons. Alright, So I do my calculator. 3.1 times 10 to the 2 plus 3.0 times 10 to the 3 equals 3.3 times 10 to the 3 newtons. That's the force of tension.